Hello my loves and welcome to our inaugural video here in our little filming space. We are going to start out this channel and start our first deep dive with a bang. We're going to be talking about mortuary cannibalism today. I know. But Auntie Mia, you said we weren't going to be discussing trauma or disaster death. We were going to talk about how we handle death regularly, like without a problem going on. And you're right. That is what we're going to discuss. Let me explain my rationale for starting out with cannibalism. I promised you that we were going to be taking the trauma out of death, that we were going to be discussing historical body disposition methods from a non-judgmental and compassionate standpoint. I chose cannibalism as a way to put forth my resume of my ability to do that, to discuss the people who view the consumption of the human body as a respectful way to treat the dead. And I hope, it is my sincerest hope, that this will enable you to trust me when I talk about body disposition methods that may have more emotional connection to you personally. It may be something that's done in your culture. It may be something that was done to your parents or your grandparents, or a method of body disposition that you've considered for yourself. And I hope that in starting with something as, I don't even want to say controversial, because it's not, something as unacceptable as cannibalism will prove to you that I can be trusted to talk about these things, and that when I am telling you something, it is because I have researched it, not as an attack on anyone. So, beginning, content warning for this episode. Obviously, this episode will include cannibalism, that is the discussion of human beings consuming the flesh of other human beings. We will discuss folk medicine, predominantly and honestly only in the method in which we treated suspected vampirism in this country and treat in other places, and outdated medical beliefs. Before we really get into it, I do need to acknowledge that the term cannibal and cannibalism itself are colonial racist terms. Cannibalism and cannibal are corruptions of the name given to a different group of Caribbean peoples by the people that Columbus encountered to describe them to him. So we get the term cannibal from basically some random dude coming up to your house and going, "Hey, what are your neighbors like?" And you're saying, "Well, they're rat bastards." And then naming the behavior of your neighbor rat bastardism, or naming the supposed behavior of your neighbor as rat bastardism. So, cannibal and cannibalism are colonial terms, they are racist terms, and I would much prefer to use the phrase anthropology, which is the Latin for consumption of human. But if I titled this video Funeral Anthropology, no one would know what I was talking about. And if I used the word anthropology for all of this video, I would lose everyone's attention so quickly. So in the interest of using words that we're more familiar with and things that are going to make it easier for you to relate to what I'm talking about, we are going to continue using cannibalism for this discussion, But please, I need you aware of where the term comes from, and I need to acknowledge that I am aware of the problems with using the term. With that out of the way, with our disclaimers out of the way, with our content warnings, cannibalism is a body disposition method. There are two main types of cannibalism. Well, two main families of cannibalism. And I am going to very quickly touch on the main kinds of cannibalism within each umbrella term. Nothing graphic. This whole video is as non-graphic as I can make it, while still being informative enough to give you context, so that when I say funeral cannibalism is different, you have an understanding of why. So there are two main types of cannibalism, two main families of cannibalism, as it were. There is endocannibalism, which is eating your own kind. So this is the consumption of your own ethnic family close group. And then there's exocannibalism, of eating outside of your group. Endocannibalism is where we see things like, honestly, I'm willing to bet you first thought about the Donner Party when I said cannibalism, or the USS Essex, made famous by the novel Moby Dick, or for a more recent example, the plane crash of Chilean rugby players in 1970 in the Andes Mountains that resulted in endocannibalism for survival. All of these examples are endocannibalism, but they are also disaster nutritional cannibalism. And not for nothing, this is the most easily forgivable by society method of cannibalism and reasoning behind it. No one wanted to be there. No one. No one wanted to eat their dead. They didn't feel they had a choice. Their own survival depended on it. And we can understand that. You know, when you think about it, we can all sit and wonder and have to contemplate, would I do that if it was my only way to survive? What would I do for survival? And that's understandable and forgivable. And also not the kind of cannibalism we're talking about. We're talking about the other kind of endocannibalism, which is a respectful funerary practice, which we'll get to in a second. We need to talk about exocannibalism, so you have all of the context first. We're getting there, I promise. Exocannibalism is eating outside of your own group. This is where warfare cannibalism falls in. So think Chaco Canyon, the examples of cannibalism found in Chaco Canyon, we assume is warfare cannibalism. We assume that there are other examples of warfare cannibalism, like when hearts are being ripped out and devoured. That's warfare cannibalism. We have records of this happening at the siege of Marara in the First Crusade. You know, so it's not something that's only done in ancient and undeveloped cultures. Undeveloped. It's something that white people did too. In fact, we have evidence of on Paleolithic bone fragments from Somerset in England, aka almost the whitest of white people, showing that they practiced warfare cannibalism and funerary cannibalism. We assume there's discussion on that, but we don't know for what reasons, because they didn't leave us a written history. So we're not discussing why Paleolithic people may have engaged in cannibalism. I just need you to know that they did. And that, yeah, your ancestors very likely ate people. The kind of cannibalism that people like Jeffrey Dahmer fall under serial killers who consume their victims, or even just killers who consume their victims. This is a kind of warfare cannibalism. It's violent, and it is not meant as a respectful treatment of the dead. It is either meant for nutrition or, haha, you're basically an animal, I can eat you. That's not what we're talking about. The other kind of exocannibalism, that again, mostly white people, that I can find research for, has been medicinal. When I'm talking about medicinal cannibalism and talking about folk medicine and even outdated scientific medical beliefs, accepted scientific medical beliefs, I'm talking about things like mummia. Now, mummia is a brown powder that is created through exhuming and grinding up Egyptian, and often counterfeit Egyptian, mummies, and then consuming the powder. The powder itself was thought to... The powder itself was thought to cure or treat a whole range of diseases and ailments, everything from a headache to impotence to an upset stomach to syphilis. Take a little bit of mummy, it's fine. Again, mummia, a prescribed medication through a lot of the Middle Ages into the 20th century. This was not taken out of medical textbooks until the early 20th century, so about 100 years ago. For the record, that is when your great-grandmother was alive. This was still on the medical textbooks. It's cannibalism, guys. My loves, consuming mummia is cannibalism. Just because it doesn't look like a person anymore doesn't mean it's not. The other kind of medicinal cannibalism that I will loop in here is folk medicine and superstitious beliefs. And folk medicine, I want to talk specifically about Mercy Brown as an example of this. Now, Mercy Brown died of tuberculosis in 1891 in Rhode Island. Her mother had also died of tuberculosis, as had her sister. Her only surviving sibling was her brother, Edwin. Their father was desperate, and so in order to try and save Edwin, who also came down with tuberculosis, again, this is a very common story in pre-antibiotic and pre-antiviral history, his son got tuberculosis as well, so they dug up Mercy and her mother and her sister, but only Mercy was accused of being a vampire. Only Mercy looked fresh enough to have been a vampire. And so her heart and her liver were removed and fed to her brother. They were burnt down to ash and mixed into something and given to her brother on the belief that removing the heart and liver and feeding them to the victim would free someone from a vampire. And unfortunately, Edwin died shortly thereafter. But this common belief of consuming part of the vampire, of consuming the heart, consuming the liver, removing and destroying the organs, is medicinal cannibalism, practiced in Victorian New England. This isn't all that weird, guys. My loves, cannibalism isn't all that weird. And that is a quote that's going to go somewhere. But I digress, and I've gotten into the weeds, and we've been here for about 15 minutes, and I haven't even gotten to our actual topic yet, so... Okay, all of that background to get to our actual topic. On the subject of funerary cannibalism, we only have one social group that we have a reliable written record for, and that is the Wari. Now, the Wari live in the Amazon River Basin in South America and practiced respectful funerary cannibalism right up until the 1960s, when they were forced to stop by missionaries. Christian missionaries were going further and further into the Amazon. They had encountered the Wari, and the Wari were basically forced to give up this funerary practice or be annihilated. Ultimately, what it came down to is give up eating your dead, or you won't receive any help from the government, and we'll destroy you. We'll convert you, we'll destroy you. But it means that they practiced it long enough that modern archaeological and sociological research techniques were able to be used. We were in a position to discuss why and listen to the answers. It is so exceedingly rare for us to have that, where somebody actually asked for a reason why and then wrote down what they had been told. So we have records from the Wari of why they did this. When someone died, their body was taken out of their home and laid out in state, essentially, waiting for word to spread. For the Wari, as soon as the extended family and outside family got into town, then the body was very respectfully disarticulated, dismembered, roasted, and fed by the family, by the immediate family, to those who have at least 1 degree of relation away from the deceased. So your wife, your husband, your whatever word you want to use for spouse, your children, your parents, your siblings, they are not the ones consuming the dead. It is your brothers-in-law. It is your nieces and nephews. It is your best friend from high school. And they viewed consuming their dead as the most respectful way to get rid of the body. Because in Wari culture, the body itself is seen as something that must be completely destroyed and removed from the culture, from the community, in order for the soul of the dead to be set free. And it is important that the soul not be trapped within the body, because the Wari religious beliefs also teach that prey animals that they rely on to survive are sent to them by the deceased souls of their loved ones. And in doing that, it is their loved ones continuing to nourish those that they have left behind by sending food. So you can look at the disarticulation and the roasting and the feeding of the body as almost a mitzvah of sorts. It is a transitional ceremony that we see more commonly in other cultures, in things like throwing a Sweet 16 party for someone becoming an adult, having a bar or bat mitzvah, having a bridal shower for somebody getting married. Because the Wari believe that their ancestors' souls are what sends the food to them and how they continue to survive. Eating the body, this is the first time their ancestors getting a chance to feed them. This is the first time they're getting a chance to feed the community in the way that is their duty for the rest of their afterlife. So refusing to partake, if you are not someone who can't, for being too closely related to the corpse, if you are someone who can partake and you refuse to, or you threw up in front of the family, it was considered deeply disrespectful and an insult to the dead and the family, because No one wants to hear that their grandmama can't cook. And if the job of your deceased is to send food and nourish and feed the community, and you've got people who, on their first time being able to do that, are saying it's not good enough by refusing to partake, that is somebody telling you that your grandma can't cook. Nobody wants that. But this is done because the soul has to be freed from the body. And the body is a source of grief and trauma for the family they have left behind. So in consuming them, the community not only gives this transition ceremony and celebrates the first time that this person can feed their community in this way, they also viewed burying the body in the ground as desecration. You know, you're abandoning your loved one to the cold earth and letting them rot and go to waste. Your whole community is telling them that their flesh is not good enough to feed the community, that they are not worthy and loved enough to perform this task. And we have interviews from the Wari, and I'll link, again, descriptions and links are going to be in the description box below. We have interviews of a man who lost his son, saying that in the old days we would have eaten him and he would have been warm. You know, he would have been warm, he would have been with us. And instead, we have to think about him in the ground. We have to think about what's happening to his body while he's underground, and he's still there, and he wasn't able to, like, his soul wasn't able to leave. And I believe the phrasing he used was, we think about it and we get sad. And in the old days when we used to eat them, we didn't get as sad, because this is a cultural practice for a variety of reasons that happen because it's important. Now, in addition to the cannibalism, the Wari do also have another funeral tradition that goes hand in hand with it, and that is the destruction of the home that the deceased lived in. This home is dismantled, and the parts of it are used for the cook fire of the deceased. This serves the spiritual purpose of giving the survivors, whether those be a living spouse or children, a place that has no associations with the dead. So they are able to have a clean break and move on with their lives within the community in their new status, which is a family unit without this person. They don't have to go and see the same walls, sleep in the same bed. They don't do that. Instead, the family's only job is to grieve. They're homeless. They're bereft of this person who was a pillar of their family, whether that was a parent, a child, or a spouse, or a sibling. And the rest of the community takes them in and builds them a new home for them to go to. And that's beautiful. And in addition to taking the old home down to burn it for the cook fire, neighbors and close friends would also remove beams from the roofs of their own homes so that the roofs would sag. And the sagging roofs became a very easy visual indicator that this community has suffered a loss. And we do very similar things. This is on par with the mourning wreaths and the black crepe that you see in a lot of Victorian funeral art, where people are putting laurel wreaths or rosemary wreaths on their doors to mark a death, to mark that the family's lost someone close. So this is a human nature. We do this. And it's just a sign that the people who have these sagging roofs need a little bit more comfort, a little bit more care, and a little bit more gentleness. The closest contemporary example I can think of in modern America where I live are funeral processions. When you have that little flag on your car and you're driving slow in a funerary procession and you see all the other cars, that little flag is the indicator to the rest of the traffic around you that you are grieving, that you have lost someone and are actively grieving. That's what removing the beams from the roofs did for the wari. In addition to that, it also provides the very practical use of dry cooking fuel, because the wari live in the Amazon River Basin. It's a rainforest. Dry fuel may be at a premium at certain times of the year, and it serves a lot of different purposes to be able to do this and to have the visual representation as well as the fuel, and giving the family a new place to live. So consuming the dead for the wari is not a practice that was done for fun, and was not a practice that was done because they liked the taste of human flesh. That's not it. Most of the interviews that we have and most of the records that we have say that because the body was set aside and set in state until those who loved them could come into town, the body may have been in a state of advanced putrefaction. The reason it's impolite to throw up in front of the family is because it's expected that you are going to bring most of it back up. You just go off in private to do that without the family seeing. And it is also considered extremely rude and kind of tacky. Let's go with tacky, to overly enjoy what you're being served. And they've admitted, in interviews, it has been admitted that when young children die, it is more of a risk of having that very impolite reaction of actually enjoying what you're being served, because the little ones don't have extended family that need to come into town for a funeral, so they're not laying in state as long. Funerary cannibalism is not and was not a disgusting or barbaric or horrid practice. It wasn't. It was extremely deeply respectful of the people that they were consuming and honoring. And it fits very, very, it's a keystone in understanding wari culture. Wari culture, you have to understand why they did this in order to study cannibalism. You need to understand their reasoning for it to make it make sense, and then it becomes no more horrifying than any other funerary practice. To the wari, as I said before, burying your dead was considered a desecration because you were leaving them cold and alone, and you weren't bringing them back to the community or allowing them to serve the function that the dead are supposed to hold in Vari culture. And I do apologize throughout this video if I have mispronounced things. I do have a slight lisp, which does make pronunciation of certain words difficult for me. But there's our first deep dive. Cannibalism. Specifically mortuary cannibalism. And to me, it is tragic and unfortunate that we only have the one culture who practiced this that we could actually talk to, because it is fascinating, and I do wish we understood the other reasons why other cultures did it, because we know they did. So yeah, mortuary and funerary cannibalism with context. So, how'd I do? If you like what I'm doing, please click that like button, click subscribe. This is the inaugural episode, so this is a brand new channel. If you want to support me, please share, like, subscribe, all of that stuff that every YouTuber says. And also, exciting, I am launching a Patreon later this month, and I will have the link to that when it goes live. I will have a short video announcing that when it comes out, but I'm really excited about it, and I think you're gonna like it too. So, yeah. Until next time, my loves, farewell.